So somebody made a comment earlier about a lawyer that actually makes deals happen, makes a deal instead of kills the deal. So we all appreciate those. And how could you ask for anything more than a lawyer that's going to teach you something about negotiating and keeping your tail out of the sling than somebody that grew up in the family of a car dealer, right? So she's been negotiating deals since the time she was a little kid, I'm sure. She's somebody that's very close to my heart. We've done lots of transactions together. She's done a lot of work for me on both sides of my business, retirement and 1031 stuff, and we continue to do a lot of work today. And I just would love to have you give a nice warm welcome to Coni Rathbone. She's going to give you a lot of great information today, and please always look to her as a great resource when you need help in a transaction. Coni. You got to be careful what you're saying around here. Craig? I think she's related to Nelson, maybe.
High enough? Can you hear me? Oh, that's a little better. We'll put it up here. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and thank you for letting me speak again. I haven't been here for a while because things have been really hopping, and so David called and said, well, do I have to let you speak to get you here? And I said, well, maybe, and so he did, and I'm here. I'm going to have to stand right here so I can see my slides, and besides that, if I stand at the podium, you cannot see me over it. So this is good. I know it's a long ways away. I don't have to introduce myself. You guys have heard me speak over and over and over and over. And I want to talk about something fun that I'm doing, and that is that I am now an adjunct professor at Portland State University, the graduate real estate and finance programs. So I'm teaching a class. Please refer to me as Professor Rathbone in the future. So I'm teaching a class, and it came about in kind of an interesting negotiation. Julie Gibson, stand up, Julie. She called me one day, and she said, Coni, Jerry and I were thinking that it would be great if we added a negotiating class to our program, to the MRED program. And I said, oh, I think that's a wonderful idea. And we went on and on and on and on. And so at the end, she said, great, we want you to teach it. And then I went, That's a negotiating concept that's called getting buy-in and then hitting. How many of you here how many of you here negotiate? Okay, that's what I thought. What age did you start negotiating? Yeah, my materials say 3 with Fred Rathbone, right? That 3 more bites with your kid at dinner, that's negotiation. And so we all do it all the time. How many of you have ever studied the theory of negotiations? Yeah, well, you're better than me because before this class, I never had. And it was really, really interesting to start getting up to speed on the theory of negotiations to say, oh, yeah, I do that, and I do that, and I do that. But then there will be more tips and things that can just take you to the next level. And so it's been really good for me in that regard. And we had our first class last Friday, and I brought in 2 youngsters, Josh Schlesinger with Schlesinger Companies and Noel Johnson with Karen Pacific, and they're both in their 30s. And so I wanted the students to see young people who had been through the program that really succeeded at the program and were doing really well, and that you didn't have to be a dinosaur to be a good negotiator. And so that was pretty fun. I want to take just a minute, though, because there was supposed to be an announcement at the awards ceremony, and I said, no, I'm taking credit for that announcement. So Renee, please stand up. Come on. Renee is the newest member of the Counselors of Real Estate. It's a very prestigious organization. It is a very challenging interview process and application process to get in. And I've been in it for many years. And when I went to my first national conference, I came back and said, this is the old white-haired guys club. Because there were few women and there were few men with color left in their hair. So I really welcome Renee joining. Bob, of course, fits the stereotype of the organization. But Renee will join me in trying to get out of that. So congratulations to Renee. It was fun to help her get into the organization. Okay, so we're going to talk about negotiations and the theory of negotiations. It's your key communication and influence tool. It's interpersonal decision-making process. It happens at home. It happens at work. It happens on the bus. It happens when you're at the grocery store. Negotiations happen all the time. My best example is your 3-year-old that is not wanting to eat, and you say, okay, 3 bites more. Is there a parent in the room that has not said 3 bites more? That's a negotiation. My children criticize me for teaching my grandchildren to negotiate. But they do it too. They just don't realize what they're doing. So I've been negotiating with Fred since I was 3. So I'm pretty experienced at it. So here are the top 10 negotiating dispute resolution skills. Listen to learn. My number 1 criteria in any negotiation or business transaction, or if you're trying to get to terms of a deal, is to listen. Not talk, listen. Because you can, so often, people think they have an impasse. And if you listen carefully, you do not. There's this way around and this way around. You can deal with this nugget, but there's a way to get around it. Bring multiple issues to the table. Don't just discuss price. Discuss price and reps and warranties and non-competes. Bring as many issues to the table as you can so you have things to give away. Brainstorm jointly. Put off the discussions for a minute. I say this regularly to lawyers, and in fact, just today. And if I'm a little distracted today, it's because I have a $27 million hotel sale in New York City, Times Square, that is trying to blow up while I stand here. So I was brainstorming with the lawyer. I said, look, I have no authority for anything. And he said, right, we're just talking. And so it's a productive way to kind of set aside the negotiations and just say, okay, let's stop fighting for a minute and let's talk and let's figure out what our interests are, what really is important to our clients. Recognize power plays for what they are. Call them out. Re-examine sacred issues. What's a sacred issue? I will not sign a personal guarantee. That's a sacred issue. That's a sacred issue that I have told Fred Rathbone many times that he needs to commit to as a sacred issue. But is there a way to get around that? Could we have a limited guarantee, or are there other things you can give besides a guarantee? So really think hard about those bottom line sacred issues. Guard against threats, and we're going to go through all of these more in detail. Recognize when you need an outside mediator. It's just too personal, right? Or it's too acrimonious. Appear to shared values. What's a good shared value? Fairness. Most people, and I will say most people, want to be fair. I have a lot of people I deal with in the tenant in common sponsor thing that they couldn't give a you-know-what about fairness. But most people do. Center discussions on gains rather than losses, and keep lines of communication open. Walking out doesn't get you anywhere. So listen to learn. Listen actively to your counterpart's concerns. Resist the urge to interrupt and defend yourself or to provide your points. How hard is that? How hard is it to not interject? Think about nothing related to a business negotiation, but think about your spouse. Okay? So you have a difference of opinion about something. Can you let your spouse make 10 points without interjecting? Most of us can't. Multiple issues. When you add multiple issues to the table during the dispute resolution process, you may be able to find opportunities to make trade-offs. Some of those trade-offs are giveaways. I will regularly draft a document with a few giveaways. But the more issues that you have to decide, the better off you are at putting together a deal. It's pie expanding rather than pie slicing. We're going to talk more about that. Brainstorm solutions jointly. Framing your dispute resolution effort as an opportunity to reach a solution, not to win, not to beat someone. I am, when I talk about being a deal maker, and I also talk about my practice of happy law, right? The workout stuff that I do is not usually happy, but when I'm doing deals, It's my goal to get to the end of the deal with people, each person having recovered something, each person having what they need, maybe not what they want, because usually transactions are not done in isolation, sometimes, but usually there's a relationship, and how you negotiate is so important when there is going to be a continuing relationship. Recognize power plays for what they are, and one of my favorite examples of this, people will manipulate you. You say, I'm going to go do this, and they'll say, oh, you can't accomplish that. Or do you really think you can, if you've got a partner breakup, do you really think you can go and do better than you're doing here? That's manipulating your circumstances, and you need to call them out. And I had this experience when I was a very young lawyer. I was negotiating a big manufacturing facility deal for Matsushita Electronics. I worked on like probably 60% of the Japanese manufacturing facilities out in Hillsborough back in the 90s. And I'm even going to call out Tektronix. I don't remember the lawyer's name, but he was an in-house counsel. He was really tall and skinny and white-haired, and he kind of looked like Ichabod Crane. So there's Coni and her bouncy little self, and I was probably 25 years younger than I am now. And he started every negotiating phrase. I swear to God, this is not an exaggeration. Young woman, I don't know how many purchase transactions you have negotiated, but, and then he would go on with his point. And so I was kind of squirming in my chair, and I was really pissed off, but I wasn't trying to let it show. But what I should have done is say, your effect to manipulate me is not working, so why don't you just stop? If you call someone out on that manipulative and abusive behavior, they will typically back off. And I could have said that very calmly, just like I did now. I don't know, was I revved up when I said it now? It kind of brings back memories, so maybe I was. But something in my next classes, we're going to talk about styles and emotions. And as far as I'm concerned, you can use emotions, and this is kind of off the target, but you can use emotions deliberately, or emotions can use you inadvertently. And if you're using emotions in a negotiation deliberately, make sure you're doing it right, but don't let it really impact you. If I'm working with somebody and they're pissed off, I am in control. And I love that. I love that because I get mad very rarely in my life because it's too hard on me. It's too hard on me personally to get really mad at someone. And so I always, if they're being I always just forgive them immediately and move on because it's easier for me. But that is a very, very, very powerful negotiating tool. If you are mad, you have lost the leverage. Okay, so re-examine sacred issues. We talked about this a little bit. There's a million of sacred issues. I want to sell this house, but I don't want anything to be built next to it that doesn't meet my moral standard. Or they want me to sign guarantees and I'm not going to sign guarantees. So not saying that you shouldn't have sacred issues, I'm saying that you should examine them to see if they really, really, really are that sacred, and if there's a way that you can get around them in a way that it protects you at least part way as opposed to just giving it up. Guard against threats. I usually ignore threats. I'm walking out. Okay, fine. And then I go on with my next sentence. Because that's a bullying tactic. And it can be very effective. I deal with a lot of New York lawyers, and I actually, it's going to be hard to believe. I've never been to New York, but I've dealt with hundreds of New York lawyers, and they love bullying tactics. So I just let them spew and do their thing, and then I just go on, because it doesn't do any good to interact. It doesn't do any good to defend it. It doesn't do any good to acknowledge it. Just let them spew, and then go on with whatever it is you're going to do. That's kind of the same thing in this. You may view this as sexist, but it's been my experience being a little girl in the practice of law for almost 30 years. Again, how old was I when, you've heard this one before, I was 12 when I started. So I will go in, and there will be a room full of male lawyers, because I deal a lot of times with deals with lots of parties. I regularly close deal with 50 parties, and you've got lawyers all over the place. So you go in, and I apologize in advance, and you got a table full of alpha males. And they want to spend the first 30 minutes positioning among one another to figure out who's better and who's got the most leverage and blah, 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 blah. My predisposition is to go get a cup of tea, come back in 30 minutes and say, are you ready to deal now? Because I find that stuff completely useless. It's a bullying tactic, it's a threat tactic, and it's not productive for anyone. Besides that, I don't have to bill my client then for that time that I went and got coffee. Appear to share shared values. Want to be fair. Don't want a lawsuit. That's a shared value. I can tell you, standing here today, I think many of you know what's happened in my firm. You want to do everything in your power to avoid a lawsuit. Nobody wins in a lawsuit but the lawyers. So if you can get there, a shared value is we don't want this to end up in a lawsuit. And that's exactly the shared value that I've been using with the lawyer in this New York deal that's about to blow up. Center discussions on gains rather than losses. Don't go to a negotiation wanting the other side to lose. You have things you need, they have things they need. Why? You have done your best job if you meet both of those needs. And we're going to talk about kind of an overlapping bargaining position where you should be able to get the parties to a resolution. And don't keep the lines of communication open. If you're done for the day, say, let's have a break. Let's have a break. Let's come back to this in a week or a day or whatever, instead of, damn it, I'm walking out. I'm done. And I'm done is easy to say and it's easy to feel, but it's not a very productive negotiating technique. And the I'm done people are much more likely to end up in a litigation later on because they get that in their head, or the not one penny more. We've talked about that in some of my other classes. Not one penny more. You get that solidified in your head, and you commit to it, and it becomes your anchor. And that's not a productive mediation. I was in a mediation with some clients, and we had a good mediator. And so once my client said, we're done. This is my last and final offer. And he literally put his hands together in a prayer time, and he said, please don't give me a last and final. Because he knew that it was going to be observed by the other side as just a useless threat or bullying. So be really careful about those kinds of things. So the keys: listen. Listen. That's the most important thing in any negotiation. Prepare. And prepare is the one that I've been guilty of. Because I'm pretty good on my feet, but now that I've been learning all this theory and I've been preparing more, I'm better. And the other one that's not in any of the books, but I think it's so important, is be present. Be present. Okay, if someone in this room is looking at their email today, are they being present in this presentation? And, if I'm boring you, that's fine. You don't need to be present. But you need to be present in the negotiations. And I have been guilty of having conversations where the associate's sitting there and we're talking in a negotiation. I'm working on my email. Am I present in that negotiation? No. The client's not getting my full value. Here's another excellent example of being present. Your children are telling you a story. Are you present? Are you listening? Or are you thinking about work? Or are you doing email? Or are you checking your text? Being present in the negotiation. With my students in class, some of them were down there and they were doodling, they were scribbling, and I kind of call them out. It's just in the nicest possible way. But being present is one of the most important things, because if you're not being present, you may miss something that if you were present, you would hear and would fix the whole deal. So that's and maybe this is just all common sense to you. A lot of it was common sense to me, but it really did, as I learned some of the theories and started implementing it, it really improved my negotiating skills. So here's active learning, or active listening, this is preparation tips. Driven by anxiety, we often prepare for negotiations by writing down what we want to say. What you really should be doing, you should be writing down what you say, but more importantly, You need to be writing down a list of questions to ask the other side and how you would respond to those questions. It's not very often that you're in a negotiation, particularly on a deal that's gone on for a while, that you don't know what the other side's questions are or what your questions would be if you were on the other side. So it's just important to script those as it is to script your questions or your needs or what you want to say. Build a habit. Okay? Here's how you build a habit for listening. You practice it. You practice it. Practice it with your spouse or your children. If you can let your spouse or children speak on an area that you're disagreeing about for like 10 sentences without interjecting, then you are developing good listening skills. If you have to defend and they don't even get the first sentence out, I know many of you are guilty. I am guilty. But if they can't get the first sentence out, you are not listening. And remember, building a habit of listening is important because listening is one of the most essential negotiating skills. So use Pavlovian conditioning. Get a reward for your listening. Okay, you've had that discussion with your spouse. She said 10 sentences. You notice I use the she because the guy's the one that's not listening. She said 10 sentences. You haven't interjected. Ice cream. Ice cream is the best reward on earth. So, and I kind of joke about that, but give yourself a reward. Maybe it's just a pat on the head. Maybe it's a gold star in the refrigerator. Whatever it is, give yourself some kind of a reward because you have now learned something more. You are better at listening and practice. I mean, the people in your home will appreciate it the most if you practice listening and being present. It's like when we go to the lake house. My husband, I love my grandchildren. I have 4 grandchildren. I have a family of tiny ones and a family of giant ones. My 13-year-old granddaughter is 4'8". Okay, that's shorter than grandma. My 14-year-old grandson is 6'2". Okay, so I have all of these grandchildren. We go up to the lake house. My husband goes with me. He lays on the couch and watches Fox News. I'm out in the water with the kids. Who's present? It's so critical, and when you're trying to come to a resolution of something, first of all, your clients will appreciate it more if they believe you are listening to them, and you are going to get all of the keys that are going to be essential to you resolving the situation. How likely are you to write out and test your thoughts before engaging in a negotiation or difficult conversation? Okay, I'm going to vote what mine is. Mine is different now than it was before I started training for this presentation. Okay, how many people in the room do it always? How many people do it sometimes? How many people do it never? How many people do it halfway between sometimes and never? Okay, good. Thank you for being honest. That it's really important because what happens if you don't? Okay, you're attempting to persuade a landowner to sell their property. Somebody wants their property, you're going to get a great commission. You're looking for approval from a local government. Maybe it's at a hearing. You need help to salvage a failing development project. You're struggling to get better terms than a lease. You tried to obtain additional financing for a venture, and you don't do it, and then you go, wow, why the heck did I say that? Or why didn't I say that? How many of you have my experience with the fact that the best comebacks are after the meeting is over? Yeah? Yeah? Lots of you do that. But if you do a better job of scripting and preparing, you may have the ability to actually deliver the message to the person it matters rather than to your wife at night or your dog, whoever is being present and listening with you. So why not wing it? Because it doesn't work. If you script before you engage in a crucial conversation, it will be lots more helpful. So 5 major mistakes negotiators make: leaving money on the table because they're anxious and they want to settle, settling for too little, walking away from the table, settling for terms that are worse than your best alternative, and we're going to talk about some of those actual negotiating theory terms here, or being a bully. I think it is a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake in negotiation to be a bully. I'm not saying be a cream puff, but it's a lot different from being a tough negotiator or being a bully. And believe me, for 30 years in the practice of law, which is still a primarily male-dominated profession, I've encountered a lot of bullies. And I roll my eyes and the whole thing. But so here's debunking some negotiating myths, that they're a fixed sum game, that you got a pie and you just got to divide the pie. That's a mistake. The more issues you bring to the table, the more chance you are to have a resolution. You need to either be tough or soft. How many of you are always tough? Okay. How many of you are always soft? I tend to be more soft. I'm soft until it's time for me to stop being soft. And I have a good example about this, and it's not reminding me, so it was supposed to be somewhere else. But remember when I was working on all those DBSI workouts? DBSI was that big tenant and common sponsor, 8,000 investors, 250 properties. We were representing 30. And so every week we'd have kind of a joint call of all 30. And there were 3 other firms that were representing that number of investors in the process, and we were all coordinating together. But Kevin Thomason, a good friend of mine, he was in Dallas, Texas. People have described Kevin to me as all hat and no cattle. That's not true. He's very, very good substantively. But he would get on the phone and he would send these letters and he would just rip into people. He was just fighting every minute. I had a very different approach. I was being nice. I was being firm. But I was making progress, more progress than Kevin. And so I had one of my TIC owners challenge me, well, how come you're being so soft on everybody? Because Kevin is sending all of this and this and this and this. All of the lawyers were being compared. It was also the first experience in my life where I timed, it was precisely 15 seconds before my confidential communications to my client got to the other side. It was wild to try to work in that experience. So this guy, why aren't you ripping and shredding and kicking ass like Kevin is? And I said, well, Kevin and I have different styles. I'm being nice right now. I'm making a lot of progress being nice. When I stop make progress being nice, then I'll start being not nice. But I'm not going to stop being nice until I stop making progress. And it quieted him right down, but it's really an important message that your style needs to be consistent with the circumstances. You need to be able to be the person the moment needs. And I always like to be good cop, but sometimes I can't be good cop, and then I'm not. And so think about the person the moment needs. Now, you always have to be yourself. I mean, you can't be someone other than yourself, but think about the moment, the person the moment needs. Good negotiators are born. That's not a myth. Or that is a myth. Good negotiators learn how to negotiate, and they study. One of the best, and I think I've got this at the end, but one of the best resources I have found, the book that I'm teaching from, which is The Myth, The Heart and Mind of the Negotiator by Leigh Thompson. It's a very good book, but I have found another resource. I was considering taking a negotiations class from the Harvard Law School has a negotiations program, and get online, and for free, you will get an email, an article at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, that talks about different negotiating issues. I have found it to be really, really helpful and useful. It takes you about 10 minutes to read the article, and it provides amazing tips for different situations. Life experience is a great teacher. Well, this is kind of a myth and kind of not. Because if you are negotiating all the time, that is going to be a great teacher. But when we're looking at what we learned, we have to be realistic about whether we were really good in this situation and really bad in this situation, because we want to make sure that if we are negotiating and evaluating our own circumstances based on what we've been, you've got to be very self-aware and critical. Good negotiators take big risks. You know, everybody takes some risks, but if you really, this is my last and final offer, take it or leave it, those kinds of things, these are big risks, and they're rarely successful. Good negotiators rely on intuition or their gut. Yeah, but your gut feeling may be wrong. If you If you have done all the preparation that we talk about, then you may very well be able to have some gut instinct there, but don't rely on it. So when you're preparing for your negotiations, I said prepare, prepare, prepare. You do self-assessment, other assessment, and situational assessment. So self-assessment is, what do I want? What is my ideal outcome? Don't under-aspire. Figure out what you really need. Don't over-aspire. Don't let your ego get in there and I'm going to go into this litigation and I'm going to cut the legs out of the other party. That's ego. That's over-aspiring, and that's not realistic. And don't always think that the grass is greener. You know, what the other side has is what I want. Really evaluate what you want and you need. Other assessment, I'm not going to go through all of these. Set a target point. You know, that is your aspirational goal. That's what you want. What are my alternatives to reach that? Figure out what the other side's needs and goals are, and have an appropriate level of confidence. Assessment of the other party. Who are the other parties? What do they want? What is the counterparty's BATNA? BATNA is best alternative to a negotiated solution. And so the BATNA is not really an element of figuring out what you're going to do. It's not your reservation point, which is the lowest thing you're going to take. It's not your target point, which is what you're really shooting for. It's, if this fails, what do I do? So if you've got two partners that are fighting, and if they can't get this issue negotiated, I'm leaving. Okay, fine. That's a BATNA. I'm leaving. But that BATNA better be realistic. So you need to study and put it together very confidential, or very confidently. When you're looking at the situation, is it short-term or not long-term? Timing is often very important with respect to doing your assessment. Does the negotiation involve scarce resources? There's a limited amount of money. There's a limited amount of property. Is the negotiation one of necessity or opportunity? Is a third-party intervention a possibility? I mean, those are all things, and you can look at the other ones when you're getting there. But the fixed pie perception is something that people regularly do when they don't bring multiple issues, and the temperament is that whatever is good for one party has to be bad for the other party. And that is not true. I just can't stress enough. Bob's nodding his head. He's an excellent negotiator. You can't go into a negotiation thinking, I'm going to win and they're going to get all bad stuff. Because you remember my obstacles to closing presentation? If the other party feels abused in the negotiation, they're going to be out to get you at closing. That's part of this assessment and the fixed pie perception. People with the fixed pie perception take one of three mindsets. Resign themselves to capitulating. They prepare for hard bargaining. They compromise and attempt to reach a midpoint. And they are almost always wrong. It leads to an ineffective approach. I can't count. There were 4 elements there, not 3. So let's talk about if you are going to do pie slicing, because sometimes maybe that's all you can do. You need to be consistent. You need to be simple. You need to be effective. You need to be able to justify it. You need to be able to gain consensus. And it needs to be generally fair for everyone. Now, the more productive negotiations are pie expanding strategies. Perspective taking. Just sit and visit. Talk to people about what's important to you here. We're not talking about deal terms, but what's important? What are your issues? How do you want this to go? What would be a good end result for you? Ask questions. It's so important to ask questions when you are working on a negotiation, to draw information out to other people based on their interests and ideals. Reveal information about yourself and your interests and your priorities. It's fine to say, I've got to get to this negotiation because I really want to retire in 3 years. Right? Okay, so that is being open about an interest. And so how can we get there? I mean, this happens a lot in law firm partnerships because you have the baby boomers are aging out, and then you've got the millennials coming in, and so there's got to be a negotiation about how the baby boomers are going to get out with leaving the practice there so that the firm doesn't fail. And so it is important to reveal things. And then the general rule is don't reveal your BATNA. Don't review your best alternative until it's appropriate to do it, until it's time to do it. And there is no magic to when that time is, but you need to kind of think of the general rule of not revealing it, but sometimes it becomes very important. Unbundle the issues. Make sure you've got multiple issues to talk about. Make package deals, not single offers. There's always things that you can bargain off, and don't create false conflict. This is something that I mentioned earlier when you're talking about listening to see if you really have an absolute conflict with someone, because so often you can peel off layers of that onion and find that you've got a kernel of agreement in the middle, and you can work all of these other things out. Okay, so common pie expanding errors are having a lose-lose effect or a lose-lose mentality. Be aware of it being a fixed pie per section. Negotiations should avoid making premature concessions to the other party, and negotiators should develop an accurate understanding of the other party's interests. All of these things will help you expand the pie if you don't do them. The fixed pie perception is the belief that the other party's interests are directly opposed to yours. I've talked about that several times here. Few conflicts are really win or lose. Two incentives are cooperation and competition, and you've got to find a balance of those to get to a situation that can be viewed by the parties as win-win. So pie slicing conclusion and pie expanding, when it comes to slicing the pie, the most important information is the BATNA. Determine your BATNA prior to negotiations and attempt to approve it, and determine your reservation point, i.e. the lowest amount you're going to take. Set high aspirations but not unrealistic. So what's the BATNA? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. They are not wishful. They must be accurate. You can't, your BATNA cannot be, oh, I don't have to do this negotiation because my husband's going to win the lottery for me next week. Okay, that would be an aspirational BATNA that's not realistic. Is it time sensitive? Do you have, if there's a student picking between 3 law schools that they're going to go to, their BATNA for not getting into Willamette is that they're going to get an offer from Cornell or one of the other big schools. And so you have to think about your BATNA in terms of the time sensitivity. Do not let the other party manipulate your BATNA. If it goes out, it's the same situation. Oh, you can't go. You can't negotiate a good deal for yourself there. It's that manipulation tactic that you always have to be aware of. In this deal in this New York deal that I was just telling you about, we were going back and forth about this settlement because the sponsor has to get a settlement because otherwise the owners are going to sue him. And so we negotiated a settlement agreement, and I said, okay, well, here's the settlement agreement, but we're not giving you a blank check. And so guess what? Now they want our clients to pay $1.3 million more than they should have to pay. Does that sound like a blank check to you? And so now he was sending me all these emails. Oh, you were not negotiating in good faith, and you promised me that you would get these, and blah, 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 blah. It was a total transparent, manipulative email. And I just said, okay, Daryl, yeah. Don't talk to me about bad faith. With your client, do not talk to me about bad faith. And so it's one of those things that people try very, very, very hard, and people that use that tactic and are very good at it can come across not as manipulation. When someone is trying to put guilt on you, that's manipulation. When they're throwing things back in your face, it's kind of, thou dost protest too much. I mean, that is exactly what was happening with that. Don't confuse your BATNA with your aspiration. The BATNA is really not part of that zone of agreement. So there's 4 steps to evaluating a BATNA, and I'm almost out, so I'm going to kind of fly through the rest. Take your BATNA to the next level. Develop your reservation point. Okay, that is the best, the least that you're willing to take. So you should consider many alternatives. You need to really study this. Evaluate each alternative. Attempt to approve your BATNA when you are establishing your reservation point, and determine your reservation price. Now there is a, the theory, they like to have all these acronyms. The ZOPA, we have a ZOPA, which is the zone of possible agreements. That means the overlap between the reservation point and the target point for one side and the reservation and target point for the other side. Now, if there is a space in between, you have a bargaining surplus, and if there isn't, then you have a bargaining deficit. So here's the bargaining zone. We've got the buyer's target point, the buyer's, the buyer's reservation point, and we've got the seller's reservation point and the seller's target point. So you've got a positive bargaining zone. If you can't get that negotiation settled, then you have failed here, right? Now the next one's not so pretty. We have a negative bargaining zone. And if people are sticking to their guns, this negotiation won't settle. It won't unless somebody decides, I'm going to cave on my reservation point or my target point. And there's ways to address the target point. Let's say we're talking about selling a business. And my price, it's my business, of course, so it's worth $100 billion. Okay? And somebody's going to buy my business and they say, that was really Amazon, it wasn't me. And somebody else says, no, your company is only worth $50 billion. And so there's going to be a negative bargaining zone in that, right? And so maybe we address that negative bargaining zone by saying, okay, I'm going to sell it to you for $50 million, but I have an additional $50 million workout. I mean, that is the purpose of brainstorming and evaluating how you can get there. Brainstorm alternatives to your reservation point and to your target point. Research the other party's BATNA. Figure out what they can do if they don't get this done. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. If you're buying a house close in East Side, what is your BATNA? There's another buyer around the corner. I don't have to concede anything here because I got another buyer around the corner. And that is true. And if on the buyer's side, their BATNA is, I can't get in the school district I want if I don't do this. Your BATNA may be so bad that you have to concede. You have to get to a negotiation. But you better be realistic about what your BATNA is. So I already talked about the fact that there was a lot of time. So what is a win-win negotiation? Compromise refers to reaching middle ground. That's when you can get in that zone of possible ZOPA agreement, zone of possible agreement. Even splits like compromises refer to how the bargaining zone is divided. Even split is not necessarily a win-win. I had one recently where we were trying to sell a tick property, and this predator came in and started buying up individual tick interests and promising them the world. And that's not how you sell a tick property. You sell a tick property all in one. But these predatory people will come up and they'll buy up. And he eventually got 60%, which is what he had to have. And so I triggered the buyout for my clients, the remaining 37%. I said, okay, then we're going to partition the property. And if you don't like that, then we're going to go through this mediation process. And so we started this hideous mediation process, and it was based on arbitrators' numbers. We had 5 properties, and each property was going to have 3 appraisers. So we're talking 15 appraisers. This is an expensive process. And so we had each put our number in. Their number was 20 million, my number was 24. And so in the context of this, I said, my clients I have authority to go to 13.5. And so he came back to me and he says, okay, well, why don't we split the difference? And so we can split the difference between 20 and 13.5. I said, no, your client didn't come any distance. So if we're going to be splitting the distance, it's going to be between 20 and 24. So if you're talking in a negotiation, and sometimes splitting the difference is okay, but if you're talking about it, boy, you better be looking at the assumptions that are in there. If somebody's putting together a financial statement for you, right, you better be looking at the assumptions from which they base the financial statement, because how many people do we have in this room? 70 people we have. How many different financial statements could we have? 70, right? Because it's all based on the assumptions that are used in preparing them. Satisfaction is no guarantee that money and resources have been wasted. In fact, many happy negotiators do not expand the pie. You've got to think about it unemotionally. And building a relationship of trust with the other side by sticking to what you agree to, etc., that's really important. So signs of a win-win: does the negotiation include more than one issue? Can others be brought in? Can side deals be made? Do parties have different preferences across the negotiating issues? And so in summary, we're going to talk, and I'm just going to be right on time. I'm going to talk about the strategy. Strategy number 1 is assess your BATNA and improve it. Number 2, determine your reservation point, but do not reveal it. Now, in a long negotiation, the target piece and the reservation point might evolve substantially, right? Because time impacts it, additionally discovered information impacts it. And so you have to really be thinking about those along the way. I can tell you that I have been in the situation where we had a long negotiation over a purchase and sale agreement or a lease or whatever it was. And when we got to the end, the client was really unhappy because the amount of negotiations that happened, at the end of the day, they had a deal they didn't like. Now, is that my fault or is it their fault? Well, I don't know. It might be my fault because I may not have reminded them enough along the way of what we have all given up and what does that mean now. That's a really important point when you are dealing with your clients and this long negotiation. Okay, remember that we gave up these things. I often have clients come back and say, how could you have possibly put that provision in the agreement? And I say, well, remember we had these emails and this conversation and you agreed to give it up. So, but it's important to have documentation and remember that and remind people and reevaluate the deal as you go along to make sure it's still a good deal. Because you can always walk away from the negotiation and just rely on your BATNA. Research the other party's BATNA and estimate their reservation point. Try to figure it out as best as you can. Set higher aspirational goals, but be realistic. Long negotiations, new information, that's what I was just talking about. Be sure you evolve your BATNA and your reservation point and your target point as new information comes into the picture. And do not become anchored by your reservation point. Don't say, this is my bottom. Make the first offer if you're prepared to do it. Because if you make the first offer, you're anchoring them at some number. Now, the other party can come in and re-anchor and say, oh, no. I mean, I was also in a mediation where we were there, and the other side, they said they made the first offer, and it was a ridiculous litigation. And they said, okay, that their first offer is $550,000. And we said, okay, our first offer is $5,000. I mean, you've got to go. It was a mess. But you've got to go in and re-anchor if somebody comes up with an absurd number. Immediately re-anchor if the other party opens first with something ridiculous, and plan your concession. Ahead of time, plan your concessions. Are you going to go, and part of this evolves as a result of the negotiation, just like this one did, but are you going to go down in 100,000 chunks, in 5,000 chunks, in $1 chunks? Plan your timing. If you're going to be in a mediation, almost all mediations go, all of the real movement happens at the end of a 12-hour day, right? In the last hour, the last 30 minutes, because people are tired and they want to go home. So plan your pattern of concessions, the magnitude, and the timing. Support your offer with facts. It's much easier for you to say, I'll do this, and this is why. Here's my offer, and this is why. Rather than just saying, here's my offer. Because the more you justify it, then the more they have to take apart. Now, if you do that, then they can shoot at your facts and tell you your facts are wrong, and then you just have to reissue them and explain why they're wrong. Appeal to norms of fairness. Everybody wants to be fair. Okay, that's a lie. Most people want to be fair. And so if you can appeal to norms of fairness, that helps. Do not fall for the even split ploy. I was just talking about that. Be really careful because there's always assumptions that are used. So I have suggestions for further reading. Those are some books that I have been reading, and they're really good. But the most important thing, and I've got course materials are supported by all of these sources. Questions? Oh, I was brilliant. Yes, Jonathan.
Yes, great presentation, Connie. Thank you. You know, when you're negotiating, and somewhere in the beginning or in the middle, negotiating, you're finding that your client is not negotiating in good faith, and they're not keeping the apples with the apples, whether it's in writing or just in language.
Your own client?
Well, believe it or not,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is existing clients and certainly new ones that I'm working with the first time. Whether it's another watered down provider or whatever it is, I mean, you have a feeling they certainly want to work with you, but they're just not keeping apples with the apples of the scope of the work or what the task at hand is. How can you reel them back in, stop them from commoditizing your industry as they do? Because sometimes they're just focusing on price and they just don't see the real value.
Okay, so there was a couple of different issues there, but if I'm dealing with a client that I think is lying or they're not being quite straight, I call them out on it. Because when I'm negotiating, it is my integrity that's on the line. Theirs too, but I don't care about theirs. What I care about is mine. And so I will call them out on it, and I've had times when I've told clients, I won't take that position. If you want to take that position, you can take that position and you can find somebody else to represent you. Because you can't. It is so hard to rebuild trust. And we have such a small community here, such a small real estate community. If you lose trust in a deal, it's going to be all over town. And so you really have to be careful about that. Now, in the deal that I'm working on now, where these people are, bad faith and fair dealing, that's just manipulation. I don't have any problem with the integrity that I have negotiated these deals with. They're the ones that have changed the story. So I really call them out on it. I send, if I'm in a situation where I'm not sure about the client, I'll send CYA emails. Get it on the record. I will often tell a client when they're taking a position. We just had this, where a client bought a piece of property out of a bankruptcy estate. And there was all sorts of hair around the deal about easements and septic and all of that. We tried to get the client to wait until it was all resolved, but they didn't want to because their loan was there. And so we're now going through all of these issues, and it's turning into a litigation. And prior to the litigation, we said, look, we don't know if you're going to win the litigation. So we're telling you that it is important that you settle. And at one point, and I said, if you go forward with the litigation, it will cost you $250,000 in legal fees. And my client said, all right, I don't want to hear any more of this stuff about losing. I acknowledge you told me I could lose. I'm fine with paying you the money you said it was going to cost. All I want to hear from now on is that you're going to win. And I said, okay. And I sent her a confirming email, and we're moving forward, and it's going to be a litigation. And at the end of the day, I'm nervous that she's going to be really sorry, but that was my advice. But that is not an integrity issue like you were talking about.
So just basically be friendly firm. Just hold on to your own principles. If you're still interested in doing the deal, or you still want the client, but at the end of the day, you just got to hold on to your principles, and I call it friendly firm is what I call it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think one way to avoid that from the beginning is because, well, even when you have a client, you start with negotiating with your client. But by your technique that you brought up about repeating back what you've heard them say, you tend to lock them in. And so a big switch later is, oh, well, last Tuesday, you said this, and so it makes it harder for them to do the 100.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a delicate balance. I mean, you don't want to just throw clients out the door every day, but you do have to document. When I have notes with a client, I am always making sure that I write down what they're saying so that I know what the history was. I think our time is up. Thank you. Yes?
There's also an organization known as the Real Estate Negotiation Institute.
Oh, really?
that presents 4 different courses, typically 2 days long, that go through slowly what you've done. You have done a masterful job.
Thank you.
That what they take it in chunks, and it leads to a professional designation and so forth.
That's great, and I would encourage everybody to get the book that I used. It's really good. It gives all sorts of examples. It gives like national and world examples that are really pretty interesting, and I encourage everyone to sign up for that Harvard program because you just get little articles that are easy to read and give you tips.
So I just like to thank Julie Gibson for bringing.
Thanks.
And on that note, you might share this with Julie.
Oh, yeah, I
Thank
probably
you
will give it to
very
Julie.
much.
Thank you
Really
very much.
appreciate your
Thanks.
expertise in supporting our chapters.
Thank you.
Connie, that's your best one in the 9 years I've been coming here.
Seriously?
That's your best presentation.
Well, I told my students, thank you. I told my students that I insist, because I try to be really fun, I insist on being the cool instructor. And so I took them out for beer and pizza right after our first class. I'm bringing pastries, and it's going to be beer and pizza after the last. They said, hands down, Connie, no problem.